It does not matter whether an unaliver is 60 or 16, the law makes sure that anyone guilty of a horrific crime gets the punishment they deserve. While these 20 convicts might be extremely young, their crimes warranted serious punishment. Some even faced capital punishment.
That he would murder another person. He saw Diane Ruiz walking to work and pulled over, pretending to ask for directions. She got into the car to provide directions, but the defendant strangled her when she tried to exit. He then drove to an empty lot, strangling her into unconsciousness at least one additional time on the way there.
Wade Wilson. Friends and family members described Wade Wilson as a troubled youth. He was born into an unstable home, later adopted, and soon began mixing with the wrong crowd. Wade was first arrested in 2013, following a string of petty crimes, and then kick-started his criminal journey. Besides charges of grand theft and firearm-related offenses, Wade soon began accelerating his criminal spree. By 2015, he was accused of harming women, although nothing significant happened in those cases, and Wade was acquitted. Ironically, while serving time in prison between 2014 through 16, he met and befriended his cellmate, Jerry Mike Williams, who handed him an envelope filled with cash to unalive his wife, Denise Williams. Wade turned the information over to the police and became a state informant to take down Jerry Michael. He claimed that he did not go through with unaliving Denise because it did not feel right.
I'm not a monster. Yeah, I'm not a saint either. By any means, I've made bad decisions in the past.
But then, in 2019, Wade committed a crime so gruesome that the judge believed he was worthy of capital punishment. In October 2019, 25-year-old Wade met Christine Melton and strangled her in her home. Later that day, he lured Diane Ruiz to his car, strangled her, and then ran over her several times with his vehicle. During the attack, he called his father and confessed to the crime. His father promptly called the police, who later arrested Wade. He testified in front of the police that had he not been arrested, he would have committed several more unalivings in the Leon County area. In court, the prosecution claimed that Wade Wilson was a dangerous criminal who unalived 2 women for no reason besides the fact that he wanted to. Wade's father, whom he had called and confessed to, also claimed that his son had told him he just wanted to know what it felt like to unalive someone, and that his victims were completely random.
Did you kill Christine Melton and Diane Ruiz?
No, absolutely not.
The defense, on the other hand, brought in an expert, a psychologist, who testified that Wade had impaired critical thinking abilities because of concussions he had sustained when he was younger. The jury took everything into account, including public interest in his case, since Wade's name earned him the title Deadpool Unaliver. In the end, they returned with 2 guilty verdicts for both unalivings and sentenced Wade to Capitol Row. Public sympathy for Wade was controversial, with many claiming that a dangerous criminal was being adored for how he looked, ignoring the fact that he unalived 2 innocent women. While incarcerated, Wade has gotten pro-Nazi tattoos all over his face, has reportedly smuggled illegal substances into prison, and has even plotted an escape. Lee County Prison had to transfer him to another maximum security prison because of his antics. Rod Ferrell.
On February 23rd, the jury sentences Rod Ferrell to death in Florida's electric chair.
I think your family failed you. I think society failed you. But I also am here to tell you, in the considered judgment of this court, a troubled and disturbed youth cannot serve as an excuse for cold-blooded, premeditated murder.
In 1998, at the age of 18, Rod Ferrell became the youngest person in Florida to be put on Capitol Row. Capital punishment is reserved for only the worst of the worst, and when the judge and jury believe that a violent offender cannot be rehabilitated, no matter what, that, in their eyes, was Rod Ferrell. Rod became addicted to the role-playing game, Vampire: The Masquerade, believing that he was a 100-year-old vampire named Visago. He soon founded a like-minded community of misguided teens and established himself as their ringleader. In 1996, at the age of 16, Rod and an accomplice, Howard Scott Anderson, entered the home of Naomi Ruth Queen and Richard Wendorf. The duo first attacked the sleeping Richard with a crowbar, unaliving him and burning a V into his skin. They then attacked Naomi, unaliving her as well. According to the prosecution, Rod did not plan on unaliving Naomi but was tempted to do so after she lunged at him after she found her husband unalived.
Boom! Right across the temple of the head. So I just beat him until he died.
Ferrell's lawyers argue that he is emotionally disturbed.
The victims were parents of Heather Wendorf, another member of Rod's cult who claimed that her parents were harming her. She was not present at the home during the crime. A manhunt was launched when the group escaped Florida, traveled several states over, and found themselves in New Orleans. That was when one of the members of the group phoned her grandmother, triggering a police response, and had the entire group arrested. The 4 members of Rod's vampire clan were sentenced. The girls were sentenced to 10 and 17 years each, and Howard was sentenced to life in prison. Meanwhile, Rod was sentenced to capital punishment. His defense team argued that Rod was introduced to this culture by his absentee mother, and that she herself promoted his vampirism beliefs. The defense claimed that Rod's mother, Shonda, was part of a vampire cult herself and had made advances toward a 14-year-old, claiming to be his eternal bride.
Now I'm just Satan himself, so not that I really care.
Other evidence of Rod's mental health was also presented in court. While the judge believed that Shonda deserved a prison sentence as well, the case was about Rod, and he was irreparably corrupt. Rod continued to be the youngest person ever sentenced on Capitol Row until he was resentenced in 2023 to life in prison. Devon Moore. In 2005, at the age of 18, Devon Moore became one of the youngest convicts in Alabama's history to be placed on Capitol Row. His case sparked widespread controversy, especially because of the defense's argument that Devon was not guilty by reason of mental defect or insanity. They asserted that Devon was prompted to commit the unalivings of law enforcement officers and steal their service vehicle because of actions he had witnessed in the game, Grand Theft Auto. In June 2003, Devon was arrested on suspicion of driving a stolen vehicle. He was transported in the back of a police vehicle to Fayette County's police station. He claimed that he had bought the car from someone off the street for around $500. Devon's handcuffs were removed to check his shoe prints, and in the process, he stole an officer's handgun, shot him, and started to exit the police station. He was approached by another officer in the hallway, whom he shot 3 times, and then shot an unarmed dispatcher in the communications room. Altogether, the 3 men were unalived in less than a minute. Devon then exited and re-entered the police station over 3 times, encountering firefighters on his way out. He told them that something bad had happened out front. While the firefighters went to investigate, he stole a police vehicle and fled the scene. Moments later, when he was arrested, Devon told officers, "Life is a video game." In court, his defense team argued that he was a challenged young man who had suffered parental harm by his father, a fact that his half-siblings also testified to. However, his father claimed that he was strict and not harmful toward his kids, and that Kenneth had several run-ins with law enforcement from a young age. The prosecution argued that when one of the officers told Devon that his arrest would mean he would not be able to enlist in the army, he panicked and decided to unalive him. The judge reviewed the evidence in the case and the defense's argument that Devon was prompted to commit the crime because of a video game and ultimately sentenced him to capital punishment. T.J. Lane.
Prior to and consecutive to the 4 prison terms on the base offenses specified, the 3-year terms on each of the 4 firearm specifications.
In February 2012, 17-year-old T.J. Lane walked into the cafeteria of Chardon High School in Ohio and committed a tragedy that would completely devastate a tight-knit community. Armed with a .22 caliber handgun he had taken from his uncle's property, TJ calmly opened fire on a table of students who were simply waiting for their morning buses. In the span of a few minutes, he unalived 3 innocent teenagers and severely injured 3 others, leaving one survivor permanently paralyzed from the waist down. When law enforcement apprehended him shortly after he fled the school grounds, TJ readily confessed to the unalivings but could not provide a coherent motive, casually claiming to investigators that he did not know the victims and had simply chosen his targets at random.
Saying pull the trigger, the killer's done, masturbates to memory of you.
TJ shocked the victims' families, the gallery, and the judge by unbuttoning his blue dress shirt to reveal a plain white t-shirt underneath with the word Unilever scrawled across the front in large black marker. Throughout the incredibly emotional proceedings, he continually smirked and laughed, while the families of the unalived teens delivered their heart-wrenching victim impact statements. When finally given the chance to address the court, TJ showed absolutely zero remorse for the pain he had caused. Instead, he turned directly to the grieving families and made an offensive gesture with his middle finger. His defense team attempted to point toward TJ's unstable mental health, noting to the court that he had suffered from alleged hallucinations and came from a highly fractured, turbulent family background. However, extensive mental evaluations determined that he was legally competent to stand trial and fully understood the permanent weight of his violent actions. Because he was only 17 at the time of the crime, the judge could not legally send him to Capitol Row. Instead, TJ was handed down 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Nicholas Cruz.
I am very sorry for what I did, and I have to live with it every day. And that if I were to get a second chance, I will do everything in my power to try to help others. And I am doing this for you, and I do not care if you do not believe me. And I love you, and I know you don't believe me, but I have to live with this every day.
In February 2018, 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz walked into Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, and carried out one of the most tragic school shootings in American history. Armed with a semi-automatic rifle, Nicholas wandered the halls of his former high school, unalived 17 people and injuring 17 others. After the attack, Nicholas dropped his weapon and blended in with the fleeing students to escape the campus. He was arrested by law enforcement shortly after, walking down a nearby street. Unlike many high-profile cases, the question in court was not whether Nicholas committed the crime, as he pleaded guilty to all charges in 2021. Instead, the trial focused entirely on his punishment, whether he would be sent to Capitol Row or spend the rest of his life in prison. His defense team fought hard to spare his life. They argued that his biological mother engaged in harmful substance abuse while pregnant, leaving him with severe mental challenges and permanent brain damage. The defense claimed these lifelong developmental issues deeply affected his behavior and choices, making him unable to control his actions or understand empathy like a normal young adult. The prosecution, however, argued that the crime was coldly calculated, pointing to videos Nicholas recorded of himself planning the attack months. In 2022, the jury deliberated his fate. Under Florida law at the time, a jury had to be completely unanimous to hand down a capital punishment sentence. 3 jurors ultimately voted against it, believing his mental health issues were severe enough to spare his life. Because of this, the judge handed down 34 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Chandler Halderson.
Okay. So can we do that? Okay, they're okay.
In July 2021, 23-year-old Chandler Halderson committed a gruesome crime against his own parents in their Wisconsin home. For years, Chandler had lied to his family about his daily life. He told his parents, Bart and Krista, that he was attending college, working at an insurance company, and had recently been hired by the aerospace company SpaceX. None of this was true. He spent his time at home playing video games and created fake emails and phone numbers to trick his parents. In early July, his father finally discovered the lies and scheduled an in-person meeting at the college to find out the truth. To stop his father from exposing his secret, Chandler shot him in the back, unaliving him. A few hours later, when his mother returned home, he unalived her as well. Over the next few days, Chandler dismembered his parents' bodies. He burned some of their remains in the family fireplace and scattered the rest in different wooded areas across the county. He then went to the police and filed a missing persons report, pretending to be a worried son whose parents had not returned from a weekend cabin trip. Law enforcement quickly uncovered the truth. Investigators tracked his phone's location data, which led them directly to the exact places where the remains were hidden. During his trial in early 2022, the prosecution presented a massive amount of digital evidence, including the fake emails he sent his parents and his internet search history. The defense team had very little to argue, only suggesting that the state could not entirely prove its case. The jury quickly found Chandler guilty on all counts, including the unalivings, dismemberment, and lying to law enforcement. In March 2022, the judge sentenced Chandler to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During the sentencing hearing, the judge noted that Chandler went to extreme, violent lengths simply to avoid getting in trouble for his lies. As the judge handed down the permanent sentence, Chandler had no visible reaction. He sat completely still, wearing a face mask and a suit, and stared straight ahead. He did not cry, did not apologize to his surviving family members, and showed absolutely no emotion as he was told he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Ethan Crumbley.
Why? I love you. I love you. I love you. I love you.
Moments later, telling her husband James,
in November 2021, 15-year-old Ethan Crumbley brought a handgun to Oxford High School in Michigan. On the morning of the incident, his parents attended a meeting with school counselors regarding violent drawings found on his math worksheet. After the meeting, his parents left, and Ethan returned to class. He later went into a bathroom, emerged with the handgun, and opened fire in the hallway. He unalived 4 students and injured 7 other people. The weapon he used had been purchased by his father just days prior. Ethan surrendered to law enforcement immediately when they arrived. Following an investigation into ignored warning signs, law enforcement also arrested and charged both of his parents. He pleaded guilty to all 24 charges, including terrorism and first-degree premeditated unaliving. Because he was a minor, the court held a mandatory hearing to determine if he could legally receive a sentence of life without parole. His defense team argued that Ethan was a neglected teenager suffering from untreated mental health issues. They presented evidence that he had asked his parents for psychological help, but was ignored. The defense claimed he could be rehabilitated in the future. The prosecution argued that the crime was highly calculated. They presented his personal journal entries and video recordings made before the incident, where Ethan explicitly detailed his plans and stated his intention to cause maximum harm. In December 2023, the judge sentenced Ethan to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge stated that the crime involved extensive planning and execution. Taylor Schabusiness.
I sucked his and cut his head off at the same time because the only SD that I would ever be doing would be sucking.
Tara Pakinich and her boyfriend Steve Hendricks left their home on the night of February 21st, 2022. Tara's son, Shad Therian, had already left the home to meet his lover, Taylor Schabusiness. Sometime later that night, Shad and Taylor visited another friend's apartment, where they allegedly got drunk and smoked substances together. They then came back to Shad's family home while no one was there, went to Shad's bedroom in the basement, and continued the activities from earlier that night. The couple continued to get intoxicated and consume heavy substances. According to Taylor's testimony, Shad had asked her to strangle him sometime that night, and that all she did was oblige. She claimed that while inebriated, she could not tell that things had gotten out of hand and that Shad passed away as a result of what she portrayed as a consensual act. This was the defense's argument. However, the prosecution reminded the judge that it did not just stop at strangulation. After unaliving 24-year-old Shad, Taylor then proceeded to mutilate his body, remove his internal organs, have intercourse with his corpse, and then severed his head. Taylor then scattered Shad's remains across the home, leaving his severed head in the bucket in the basement, which his mother found the next day on February 23rd. Investigators quickly traced the crime back to Taylor and arrested her. At the time of the unaliving, Taylor was on work release for an unrelated crime and had allegedly removed an ankle monitor to spend time with Shad that evening. Taylor's case gained widespread attention not just for the brutality that was committed that evening, but for her antics in the courtroom. She was continuously disruptive, yelled out during sentencing, and attacked her lawyers several times. Taylor's defense team was changed at least twice because of her antics. In the end, the judge handed her a guilty verdict, with a life term without parole. In his closing arguments, the judge stated, "This crime offends human decency. It offends human dignity. It offends the human community. It really does." Payton Gendron.
For stealing the lives of your loved ones. I cannot express how much I regret all the decisions I made leading up to my actions on May 14th.
In May 2022, 18-year-old Payton Gendron committed a racially motivated mass shooting at a Tops supermarket in Buffalo, New York. Payton drove over 200 miles from his home in Conklin, New York, to a specific neighborhood in Buffalo. He researched and targeted this location because it had a high population of black residents. Armed with a semi-automatic rifle and wearing heavy tactical gear, he opened fire in the supermarket parking lot and inside the store. He unalived 10 people and injured 3 others. He also live-streamed the attack on the online platform Twitch. He surrendered to law enforcement when officers confronted him inside the building. In November 2022, he pleaded guilty to 15 state charges, including first-degree unaliving and domestic terrorism motivated by hate. Under New York law, this terrorism charge carries a mandatory sentence of life in prison. Investigators found a lengthy document written by Payton before the attack. In it, he detailed his exact plans and stated he was motivated by white supremacist beliefs. He specifically cited a racist theory, claiming that white populations are being replaced by minorities. He chose the supermarket to target as many black people as possible. Payton also faces separate federal hate crime charges, which could potentially result in a capital punishment sentence. In February 2023, a judge formally sentenced Payton to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentencing hearing was highly tense. As family members of the victims delivered their impact statements, the emotion in the courtroom peaked. At one point, a man in the gallery rushed forward and lunged directly at Payton. Court officers immediately surrounded Payton and quickly pulled him out of the courtroom. After a brief recess to secure the room, he was brought back in. When allowed to speak, Payton apologized, stating he was sorry for committing the crime based on things he read online. The victims' families loudly rejected his apology. Payton cried briefly during the hearing but largely stood quiet and still as the permanent sentence was finalized. Anderson Lee Aldrich.
The court finds that Anderson Aldrich appears in custody for video advisement today with counsel. Counsel, are you waiving reading an advisement of the rights, charges, and penalties in this case at this time?
Yes, we are.
Are the people seeking a proof evident presumption great hearing in this matter?
Yes, Your Honor.
22-year-old Anderson Lee Aldrich was reportedly suffering from several mental health disorders. He was estranged from his father, had an absentee mother, and lived with his maternal grandparents. Anderson was also the target of online bullying. Many of his bullies would make fake online pages of him with homophobic slurs. Anderson had previously been arrested and charged with threatening his grandparents after they had announced their plans to relocate. With everything going on in his personal life, Anderson decided to commit a violent act in 2022 that would take the lives of 5 people and injure at least 25 others. Armed with assault weapons and handguns, Anderson entered Club Q, an LGBT nightclub in Colorado Springs, wearing a protective vest. He then started firing at the crowd, which was filled because it was Transgender Remembrance Day. The club was also one of the most popular clubs in the area. A few patrons mistook the gunfire for music and continued dancing. It was not until several minutes later that they realized there was a shooter. 2 veterans managed to subdue the attacker, and he was injured in the process after several other patrons lunged at him to attack him. When police arrived, they arrested Anderson, whose face had been stomped on multiple times. The defense argued that Anderson was a challenged young man and that he was questioning his identity. That came as a struggle because of all the bullying he had faced in his youth. The defense claimed Anderson was non-binary and went by they and them pronouns. However, family members claimed that Anderson had never expressed that he was non-binary and had always gone with masculine pronouns. The prosecution argued that this was just a ploy to diminish Anderson's responsibility for the crime. The judge believed that Anderson's crime qualified as a hate crime, carrying a mandatory life sentence. Together with 5 life sentences, the judge also sentenced Anderson to over 100 years in prison, sealing his fate. Devon Erickson.
2 suspects are in custody, 18-year-old Devon Erickson and a 16-year-old teenage girl who prefers to be called Alec McKinney. Both are now being charged as adults.
In May 2019, 18-year-old Devon Erickson, along with Alec McKinney, carried out a shooting at STEM School Highlands Ranch in Colorado. The 2 students hid firearms inside a guitar case and a backpack to bypass school security. They entered a classroom and opened fire on their classmates. During the attack, an 18-year-old student named Kendrick Castillo lunged at Devon to disarm him. Kendrick was unalived in the process, but other students managed to subdue Devon until law enforcement arrived. 8 other students were injured during the incident. Devon's defense team argued that he did not want to participate in the shooting. They claimed that Alec had manipulated and forced him into carrying out the plan. However, the prosecution presented evidence showing Devon was a willing participant. They showed that Devon had messaged specific friends to warn them to stay away from the school, proving he knew the attack was going to happen and actively chose to proceed. The jury rejected the defense's arguments and found Devon guilty on 46 charges, including first-degree unaliving. Devon was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 1,282 years. During the sentencing hearing, the family of Kendrick Castillo delivered statements regarding their loss. Throughout the entire hearing, Devon showed absolutely no emotion. Brian Kohi Jr.
So, parents have some concerns of some stuff they may have found in your room?
Yeah, I believe so.
And what would it be?
A human head and hands.
Like, for real human head and hands?
Yes.
From?
That fellow who went missing recently.
Which fellow was that?
19-year-old Brian Kohi Jr. admitted to investigators that he had developed a fascination with unaliving. He believed that the perfect victims to carry out his chilling fantasies on would be homeless people. In February 2021, he stated that he found 69-year-old Herren Barnes sleeping on the railroad tracks near a highway in Grand Junction, Colorado. He approached the sleeping man with a knife and began stabbing him. According to Brian, Herren cried out multiple times during the attack, begging Brian to stop. After unaliving him, Brian then severed his head and hands and took them back with him as prizes. He later dumped Warren's body in the river and also sank his car to avoid suspicion. When the police recovered his vehicle, they found blood on the trunk, but did not question him further. It was not until months later that Brian's parents turned him in after they found the decomposing head and hands in his closet. When police approached Brian, he admitted to the crime, gave them chilling details, and claimed that he had planned on unaliving more people in the future. The defense claimed that Brian was not guilty by reason of insanity, stating that he needed psychiatric help and should not be incarcerated. Meanwhile, the prosecution pointed out that Brian had a history of violence against animals and that he had carefully selected his victim, hoping no one would find out. Brian was ultimately sentenced to life in prison. A statue of Herren was constructed outside of the bridal shop where he would spend his time reading, earning him the nickname, the Reading Man. Aiden Fucci.
This is serious, man.
It's very serious.
This is no joke. This is your whole life. Your whole life.
And ours.
And ours. And your brothers and sisters. And don't forget you're going to school wrong.
Why?
Because the kids will hurt me.
14-year-old Aiden Fucci contacted 13-year-old Tristan Bailey on the night of May 8, 2021, asking him to sneak out and meet him. She obliged. CCTV camera footage then showed the two of them walking together before Aiden was seen running in the opposite direction, alone, and with his shoes in his hands. The next morning, Tristan's family members reported her missing the next morning, and police immediately arrested Aiden. He initially claimed that after briefly walking to the park, he came back home, and Tristan claimed she had someone to meet and would come back later. While being transported to the station, Aiden made a video asking Tristan to return and commenting that it was fun being in the back of the cop car. A few hours later, when Tristan's body was retrieved, Aiden changed his story, claiming that he had pushed Tristan after she had attempted to touch his private parts and she fell and hit her head. However, according to the coroner's report, Tristan had over 100 stab wounds and the word karma written over her torso. The prosecution claimed that Aiden had told his friends at school that he had been planning on unaliving someone and to expect his name to be on the news within the month. They could not establish a motive for the unaliving and believed that Tristan was just a random target. Because of the calculated nature of the case, the judge decided to try Aiden as an adult and sentenced him to life in prison. Demaris Elkins. "15-year-old Dominique Lang and 17-year-old Demaris Elkins confronted Sherry West as she was returning home with her 1-year-old son, Antonio Santiago. Elkins tried to rob Sherry, and when she did not comply, he shot her twice. One bullet missed, and the other went through her head. In perhaps one of the most shocking outcomes imaginable, Elkins then pointed the gun at Antonio, shooting the sleeping baby between the eyes at point-blank range and unaliving him instantly. The case received widespread media coverage because of Elkins' brutality. Tragically, this was the second child that Sherry had lost to violence. Her older son had been stabbed and unalived sometime in 2008. According to Sherry, she had pleaded with Elkins not to unalive her son after he threatened to do so when she said she did not have any money on her. She also claimed that he hit her in the head with the revolver after unaliving her son. A few days after the unaliving, police received an anonymous tip leading them to Lang, who testified against Elkins. The court also heard how Elkins's mother, aunt, and sister had attempted to cover up his crime after he had admitted to unaliving someone. The judge and jury were appalled at the details of the crime, and also took into account the fact that Elkins had previously attempted to rob and shoot a priest as well. The case was open and shut. Demaris Elkins was sentenced to life in prison. Alyssa Bustamante.
Grandpa helped you, didn't he? No.
On October 21st, 2009, 15-year-old Alyssa lured her 9-year-old neighbor, Elizabeth Alton, into the woods close to their homes in Cole County. Alyssa had homicidal ideations and had repeatedly expressed her desire to unalive someone. She had previously been hospitalized for attempting to take her own life in 2007. On her social media profiles, Alyssa claimed that she wanted nothing more than to hurt people. So, in October of 2009, she chose Elizabeth as her victim. Alyssa had already dug a shallow grave in the forest and convinced her little sister to bring out Elizabeth to play. She then asked her sister to wait outside the woods while she went in, strangled Elizabeth, stabbed her repeatedly, and then dumped her body in the gravesite. Alyssa later wrote in her journal how exhilarated she felt after unaliving someone. She even attended the local dance at her church after the violent act. Her defense team tried to argue that Alyssa was a troubled teen who did not know any better, but the prosecution claimed that Alyssa certainly knew better than to unalive someone. The judge sentenced her to life in prison. Sheila Eddy.
$16.
16-year-old Skylar Neese was unalived in July 2012 by her best friends, 16-year-olds Sheila Eddy and Rachel Schoaf. The three girls had met at University High School, where Skylar was an honor roll student. According to Rachel's testimony, Sheila had been the one to hatch the plan to unalive Skylar, and their only motivation was that they just did not like Skylar enough to be friends with her. On the night of the unaliving, Skylar was lured out of her home by the two girls, who then went together to the woods, smoked, and ambushed Skylar. The girls repeatedly stabbed Skylar, making sure she was unalived. When Skylar's parents tried to report her missing, the police initially dismissed the case, believing that she had simply run away from home and would return soon enough. It was not until Rachel suffered a mental breakdown in the aftermath of the crime that she admitted to the police what really happened that night. In court, Rachel was shown leniency for testifying against Sheila and coming forward, but she still received a lengthy prison sentence. Meanwhile, Sheila, for her lack of remorse, was sentenced to life in prison. Lionel Tate.
Waited for the ambulance. Crossett Tate went on to say that she had no idea Lionel had been involved in Tiffany's death. When she told her son that the little girl had died, she testified he, quote, looked at me like he was shocked.
What makes Lionel Tate's case particularly sad is the fact that everyone had once rallied for him to have an early release, only for him to turn back to crime. In 2001, at the age of 13, Lionel was handed a life sentence for the unaliving of his cousin, 6-year-old Tiffany Unick. Lionel claimed that he was playing wrestling with Tiffany while his mother was upstairs, and that suddenly Tiffany stopped breathing. According to the medical examiner, however, Lionel had beaten up Tiffany so badly that there was no way he could have known that she would soon be unalived. While the defense claimed that Lionel was just a child and had no intentions of premeditating an unaliving, the prosecution argued that punishment was still warranted. When the judge handed Lionel a life sentence, however, the prosecution started working with Lionel's defense team to get him parole. This was a controversial move, but it worked, and Lionel was soon paroled. However, just a few years later, while still a minor, Lionel was arrested again after he brandished a weapon at a pizza delivery man and tried to take someone hostage. This time, the prosecution argued that Lionel was a danger to society and should not be released. Cameron Herren. In 2018, while street racing along the Bayshore Boulevard, Cameron Herren struck and unalived 24-year-old Jessica Raubenolt and her 21-month-old child, Lilia Raubenolt. The case gained widespread media attention for Cameron's online presence, with many fans petitioning for a lighter sentence. However, the prosecution argued that this was not the first time that Cameron had been speeding. The Mustang used in the crash was given to Cameron just a few weeks prior to the incident as a graduation present. Cameron had been speeding over 100 miles an hour, whereas the speed limit was 35 miles an hour. The judge also heard how Cameron was cited for speeding and street racing before, but ignored warnings, leading to a lengthy prison sentence. Paul Ferguson.
I asked the judge for nothing more than mercy and fairness, to offer me compassion so I might learn from him. I only hope to better myself in the coming days, and serve my time with what little honor I have left, and to make right my faults in search of a better tomorrow.
Paul Ferguson participated in the severe harm and starvation of his 15-year-old disabled brother, Timothy Ferguson, in Michigan. Paul lived with his mother, Shanda Vander Ark, and acted under her direct instructions. Together, they subjected Timothy to extreme punishments. They withheld food from him, forced him to consume hot sauce, and made him sit in ice baths for hours. Paul frequently sent text messages to his mother updating her on the punishments. As a result, Timothy passed away. Law enforcement arrested both Paul and his mother shortly after discovering the conditions in the house. Paul pleaded guilty to first-degree child harm. As part of his legal strategy, he agreed to testify against his mother during her trial. On the stand, Paul admitted to his role but claimed he was manipulated and terrified of his mother, stating he simply followed her orders. Shanda Vander Ark was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Then, the judge sentenced Paul to 30 to 100 years in prison. The judge stated that Paul's actions were horrific and that he had the power to stop the abuse at any time, but chose not to. He cried heavily, hyperventilated, and trembled while reading a written statement to the court. He apologized for his actions and claimed he deeply regretted what happened to his brother. Despite his apology, the judge did not change his sentence. McKenzie Sherilla.
The families of Dom and Davia, I'm so deeply sorry. I hope one day you can see I would never let this happen or do it on purpose. I wish I could remember what happened. I'm just so sorry. I'm heartbroken. I love Dom and Davia. We were all friends and Dom was my soulmate.
In July 2022, 17-year-old McKenzie Sherilla drove her vehicle in a business park in Strongsville, Ohio, with 2 passengers, her 20-year-old boyfriend, Dominic Russo, and their 19-year-old friend, Davion Flanagan. McKenzie accelerated the car to 100 miles per hour and intentionally steered it directly into a brick building. She did not apply the brakes before the impact. Both Dominic and Davion were unalived instantly, while McKenzie survived the crash with several injuries. During the investigation, law enforcement discovered that McKenzie and Dominic had a history of conflict, and she had previously threatened to crash her car during their arguments. The prosecution presented technical data from the vehicle's computer system, which proved that the car was working correctly and that the accelerator was pushed to the floor at the time of the crash. They argued that the act was a premeditated unaliving. The defense claimed that McKenzie had lost control of the vehicle and did not intend to cause a crash. During the sentencing hearing, the judge sentenced McKenzie to 2 concurrent life sentences with the possibility of parole after 15 years.